Welcome to Graphic Novels in the Classroom, Building Librarian-Teacher Partnerships. This session will be moderated by John Shableski in conversation with our distinguished guests, Shannon Live, Kaitlyn Roach, and Dr. John Weaver. If you're on Twitter, you can follow us at LibraryPass News and Comics Plus and share your questions, comments, and insights with us there too. Today's webinar is presented by LibraryPass. We curate high-interest, immersive digital content that helps libraries and schools expand their reach and engagement without breaking their materials budget. Our Comics Plus platform offers unlimited simultaneous access to thousands of digital comics, graphic novels, and manga in collections curated for elementary, middle school, and high school readers. We also offer a complete collection, including thousands of additional titles for older readers to public and academic libraries. Learn more and sign up for a free demo account at comicsplusapp.com. For pricing information, school libraries can also contact Mackin, our exclusive K-12 partner, while public and academic libraries can contact Brodart or Biblioteca. And now I'll turn it over to John and enjoy the session.
The original description of this session is about the growing contingent of high school teachers that are bringing graphic novels and comics into the classroom. But this is also starting to make its way down through the grades as well. And so on our panel this evening, we've got representation from the spectrum, if you will. And so real quickly, my name is John Shableski. I'm your host. My guests this evening, I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about how they got into this world. And we'll start with Shannon Live. Hi, Shannon.
Hey. Well, I'm Shannon, and I actually work with Comic Professionals, and we're a nonprofit organization based in Austin. We actually run a full-scale normal comic book store on the day-to-day basis to fund our nonprofit goals, which is creating curriculum and resources and other supplies and things like that that we can give to librarians and teachers and parents, even, just so that they can learn how to use comics as a way to influence reading, writing, and emotional and social development skills for their students and kids. And we create workshops, and so we'll go into schools, we'll go to libraries, and we do these workshops, and we kind of just help students out with learning all of those skills using the standards that the schools have been given, but also kind of making up some of our fun, like, little ways that kids can just be excited about it through comic books. And how I got into it is I was working with some students who were very unhappy with the materials they had been given, and I was running a reading and writing lab, and they just could not, no matter what I did, they wouldn't get into the process. They hated everything we talked about. And so I just started bringing in comic books and using the same questions, but about comic books. And it grew out from there. And now it's a full-scale nonprofit.
Cool. All right, we'll go alphabetical order then. Kaitlyn?
Hi, my name is Kaitlyn Roach, and I'm a high school teacher in Denver. I teach kind of the whole gambit of kids. So it's mostly 10th graders, but I also do a co-taught 10th grade class, which is kind of a mix of special ed students and kids sort of on that regular track. I also teach creative writing and yearbook, and I've taught AP Lit as well. So I've done kind of all of it. And just about 5 years ago, I attended Denver ComicCon, which really got me interested in the possibility of incorporating comics in the classroom, and ever since then, it's kind of been a staple.
All right, Dr. Weaver.
Yeah, I've been teaching at Williamsport High School, mostly seniors, sometimes sophomores occasionally, but right now it's just seniors, and senior English. And I've been teaching comics kind of as a way to get kids interested in film first, because I'm a film guy. Then suddenly I'm still a film guy, but now I'm more a comic guy. And it kind of built from there. I was trying to teach comics as a way to understand film. And then I met John Shableski, and my daughter outed me to him as a comic book guy, because I started getting into comics. About a year later, I was starting to teach Watchmen in the classroom. And now I teach a bunch more comics, mostly nonfiction now. So,
now,
yeah.
in that process now, as John mentioned, how we met, I think, and it's a similar experience too for me with Kaitlyn, is this moment of discovery that you both had of this opportunity. And now that I think back of it, introducing Watchmen is a pretty big step. At least I don't usually hand Watchmen to adults because I feel like that's a symphony that they may not be ready for. But your kids were, one of my favorite stories was the kids buying their own books.
Yeah. Yeah, they just start buying their own stuff and said, "Can I turn this in? I bought Watchmen." It's like, okay. Yeah, and there's some kids who, like, their parents decided that they didn't want to. Sometimes a parent will opt out, which is fine for us. I'll give them a different book. I've got a room full of books, but it doesn't have to be a graphic novel necessarily, but something touching on the same themes. But this kid bought his own book, and so
Cool.
he had to return it in, but he bought his own. So, you know.
So one of the things that we're getting at with this conversation is the partnership opportunities that the teachers have with their school librarians or even the public librarians that you work with. Kaitlyn, when you and I met, it was about trying to find an opportunity to present at ComicCon there in Denver. But the presentation that you guys did, how did that come together? What were the tools that you used for that process?
Honestly, a lot of that was just me and my team kind of like splitting ways. We went to our public libraries and we just kind of roamed the shelves. And I remember walking out with like a stack like this. Like, I didn't know what I was grabbing. I was just like trying everything, and I just grabbed everything. I grabbed some titles I recognized, some that I just thought, like, the cover of this looks pretty cool. I flipped through some pages and thought that looked cool. And we just then sat down, like, you know, a bunch of kids and just read these comic books and started throwing them into piles. Like, this one is going to be great for what we're doing. The other thing that we really tapped into was just the online comic community. So just reaching out to other people's on Twitter, other teachers on Twitter and Facebook, and just asking them what they do. And that's really just what propelled our work and just getting it going in our own classrooms.
Shannon, do you have a process? Well, obviously you have a process, but how do you decide what kind of graphic novels or comics you're going to use in the program that you do?
Well, I actually have to read every book that comes into our store to determine whether or not I want to keep ordering it for the store. So when I'm reading those books, a lot of times I'm thinking, like, what is the level of the readability of this? What is the age range that's appropriate for? I actually made a form that is a Google form, and when I'm reading it, I can go through and say, what are the themes in this book that I got out of this? What are some of the important subject matters? Who is that important for? What are the unique words that the reader would get out of this book when they're reading it for different age ranges? And so then I can go back in and say, okay, well, now that I've looked at this entire book and I know more about what's coming out with it, I can actually say, this is what I want to use this for in a workshop, or in, just a curriculum that I can send to a school with the copy of all of those books. Because a lot of times that's what we'll do, is we'll order that issue and we'll pair it with the curriculum and we'll send it out to a school and say, here's a great way to use this in your classroom. And so I look at every book that I'm reading and look for those value points in it. Or I have people who come and say, oh, we really want to talk about, Asian American culture right now, because that's something that we really want to teach our students. And I'm saying, okay, well, here is American Born Chinese. Here's Superman Smashes the Klan. Here are these great books, and here's how to use them in your classroom, and how to have that conversation. So it's kind of twofold between, if I'm already reading the book, evaluating it, or somebody saying, I need to be able to teach about this, or we're doing a workshop on zombies. What's an appropriate, way to incorporate that in? How do I get a book that my students will be interested in? And saying, okay, here's those options for you, and here's that list, and here's how to make a curriculum for your age range.
I see you guys. John, go ahead. You're nodding.
No, it's I was really appreciating what you were saying. Essentially, I didn't have a thing to add to that. I just really like that idea.
Well, it was a great nod. Thank you. Well, actually, one of the things when she started talking about how she analyzes the books, I was thinking about how this conversation I was having with John on the porch that day was how much he enjoyed Watchmen, and introducing it into the classroom changed that for you. And for each of you, Shannon, you kind of already got into this area, but how does that, John, how did that affect the way you look at not just Watchmen, but other stories as an educator?
Well, when I started doing Watchmen, and it was actually really impressed with what the kids found out, and they actually pointed stuff out that I'd read Watchmen since it first came out, like pretty much every year. Right? Every year I would read Watchmen, but they would find stuff that I never noticed, which is really cool. But after that, I've actually gotten much more into nonfiction. Like I started with graphic memoir, Persepolis. I've been teaching My Friend Dahmer for quite a while, and I'm actually getting much more into nonfiction, because that's generally what I'm attracted to anyway. I mean, I like fiction. It's part of what my job is, fiction. And I like fiction, but nonfiction is what I read for fun, and that's kind of what I do with my classrooms. I'll do a lot of, whether it's graphic memoir or it's oftentimes narrative, but it's generally nonfiction, and some of it's. I'm thinking about getting into economics. That's an old book,
right?
Much older book, but it's an economics text. I've been thinking about getting into that too.
Kaitlyn, how hard is it when you pick up a graphic novel to read it without analyzing where it fits in what you do?
I mean, I feel like there's always a place to kind of fit it in, whether there's going to be like a supplemental text that's going to complement like some prose-based literature that we're reading, or if it is kind of like we just wrapped up our main book that we were just reading was March. And it was just, we were connecting it to all of the events of the past year. So it kind of feels actually like there's a pretty open door to be like culturally responsive through these graphic novels, to like make them fit with just lessons that kids care about. So I don't think it's that difficult. It takes like a little bit of creativity, but it always fits somewhere.
Right. How did the students react then to this process when you walk in? And you guys have been teaching long enough to where you know what the responses are when you walk in the door. Is it pretty much all the kids are engaged, or do you feel like you have to win some of them over in the process? But what is your entry point, Kaitlyn, when you bring that in?
So when we first started doing it, we kind of did like just a little like pre-survey, like what's your experience with graphic novels? Do you read manga? Do you think they're valuable? And from those surveys, it seems like it's evident that I would say the majority of kids are really excited and have had some experience with it. But there are a handful who are like, comics are for nerds, right? But we win them over by the end of it, and they're super excited. And what I think is awesome about it, like I'm pretty convinced at this point that I can make any piece of pop culture have really higher level thinking and in-depth learning that goes with it. And that's been a way that I justify it with my peers as well. And the kids, I think, get really into it. Some of the best conversations that happen in my classroom have been around graphic novels and comics.
Well, Shannon, for your relationships with the people that you're working with, is the challenge becoming less in getting them engaged? Especially, I'm speaking more to the adults, like the librarians or the other professionals that you deal with in the system that you're working. Is it becoming easier now?
It comes and goes, and it kind of just depends on what age range. A lot of the times, I still hear the answer of, "Oh, well, we don't do comics. That's not real literature," or "We want our students to read real books." So I do get that a lot. And a lot of times, if the schools do take the workshops on, they might pick up the writing workshop, and they'll say, "Well, we'll let you come in because we need something fun for the kids to do that doesn't really, as a day off," and kind of pushes it aside a little bit. But at the same time, I get messages. I have one of our subscribers just told me his school wants me to come because they saw one of our storytime videos where I was dressed as Scarlet Witch. And so they said, we're so excited about Scarlet Witch. Can she come to our school? Like, we will totally love to have Scarlet Witch come tell the kids about comic books. And it's so now that, you know, something like that happens. And for me, that's great because now I can come do an emotional development workshop on how to deal with trauma as Scarlet Witch and talk to students and use, you know, House of M and storylines, any storyline with Scarlet Witch in it at all, because they're all traumatic. Use any of those storylines to build curriculum around the idea of how to deal with trauma. And teachers are excited because now that's a show that they just enjoyed on the TV themselves. So they want to see that character come to their school and they want to have those conversations. And it does kind of open some doors, but there are still a lot of places where there is that pushback where I have to say, not only does it do this, but like, or am I going to do this, but here's the actual study behind how that works. And I just had the conversation today about the amount of words you learn from reading a comic book with somebody versus the amount of words you learn from, you know, adult literature, classic literature, things like that. And so sometimes you still have to bring all of your research and hope for the best.
You know, that ties in perfectly with the question we got in the chat. As a newer librarian, and this person says, I find that there are teachers who are resistant in allowing their students to even checking out the books. And they're asking for recommendations. How do you recommend, or what do you recommend to get these teachers to change their minds and allow kids to read them? Now, I've known John long enough to where he could probably just tell people, let the kids read the books and they'll listen to them. But there's got to be, you guys all get that, and I'd like you all to answer that question. And Shannon, you kind of went in that direction, but is there some specific tools, John, we'll start with you, that you can say, okay, if you're going to ask me questions, this is where you start?
Yeah, it used to be I just give someone Watchmen and say, read and we'll talk about it. But what and the thing I like about Watchmen, even though I do much more nonfiction now, is freeze is things. It says my internet's unstable right now. But what we're doing is I talk to them about the complexity of, because they all want about complexity, and that's kind of what they're worried about with comics. So I just talk to them about when they have to go from panel to panel and look at the words and the to relate panel to how they have to make these. They have to make these students have to make these connections every single panel. That it's a very difficult thing. It's more difficult than a lot of books they're going to read. Just the real books that other teachers teach.
The real books.
And I said, look, here's what you're doing. So I'll walk them through it.
Kaitlyn, what's your go-to?
You see this?
So I have kind of like two ways that I would speak to like resistant teachers about this. So the first, I think, is just like, sometimes I think teachers prioritize the canon and real books over engagement. Yeah. And I can assign Gatsby and a kid can throw it in their backpack and they can fake their way through it for an entire unit. And I can say that I taught it, but what good is that? If they're faking it and I'm teaching lessons and they're just playing school to get through it, then that's useless. Like I need the kids engaged in the actual reading. So that would be my first thing is, you know, that's great that you're assigning real books or the kids reading them. The other thing I would say is teaching, I think even like advanced readers, like adult readers, sometimes just don't know exactly how to read these books. And they just think that the pictures are supplemental to the text and that it's for kids who, you know, it's for struggling readers who maybe need that additional help when really we've used these graphic novels and comics with AP kids and with honors kids. And I think just showing adults, teachers, resistant teachers, that the angles and perspectives and shading are crucial to like analyzing and understanding these books and just how in depth they could be analyzed is something else that I would say.
Shannon, How do you, what do you look for to determine the effectiveness of the books that you're using with the students? How do you gauge that? Is it, I'll stop. Go ahead, you answer.
One of the ways that it's really easy for me to tell if a student, if what I taught them was effective, is if they keep going without me. You know, if I come in and I teach one issue of a comic and I have that conversation about it, and then those students want to read the rest of it, or they want to know about another book by that person, or another, even just go find their own genre of comic that they enjoy, then I know that teaching comics was effective. I actually ran into a student who had attended one of our writing workshops. One time I ran into her 2 weeks later, and she was at a restaurant and she was drawing her comic book that she started in the workshop, and her mom had been at the workshop with her. She said she hasn't stopped. Like, this thing is massive. She just keeps going, and everywhere we go, she's working on it. And she's so excited. She just wants to keep making comic books all the time. And we don't know what to do. And I was like, what do you need to do? She's writing, she's drawing, she's entertained with something educational. Encourage it. That's what you need to do. That's it. And to me, that's how I gauge the effectiveness. Like, are those students just, do they fall into it and want to stay in it? Because if so, then I did my job.
I think it's a pretty interesting byproduct that you pointed out, is the kids that are inspired to draw. John, do you see that with your students as well?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of people who do comic sort of, a lot of them are inspired by manga, but they do a lot of drawing, and even in their art sketchbooks, they'll just do they'll do some rudimentary panel work. And yeah, I do have a lot of kids who will do that. What I really am into, especially since I teach AP seniors, and I teach all seniors, but AP seniors and stuff. One of the ways I find out whether they are learning is I have them write about comics, and not in the way they'd write about Hamlet. They have to write, they have to write about the words, but they have to incorporate panels and analyze the panels. How does this panel fit into the, and so it's not just writing, it's interpreting, it's your standard interpretation, but they have to look at the panels too. And that's got to be part of their interpretation. Too many people write about, these are professionals who write about comics. They'll write just prose. They'll have like an occasional cover of Superman, but it's not related to their point. I've never seen a professional write well about comics yet. I mean, yeah, they have interesting things, but they're all talking about text.
Right.
They're like not paying attention to the medium.
I want to real quick acknowledge some of the folks that have checked in. We've got 2 folks who are in the Oakland area. Hello, greetings everybody out in California. Something that John touched on there that I want to go to Kaitlyn with, the panel you guys presented, and for our audience, one of the things that I want to get to here is there's so much more to what's happening in this experience of bringing these graphic novels in the classroom. But that presentation, Kaitlyn, that you guys did at the following Denver ComicCon that I met you at, the artwork that these kids brought to you was so much more than I had even anticipated. Can you talk about how that process evolved?
Yeah, so it really started with hearing, oh, I can't draw from a lot of kids. Like, that's where it began. And we decided there were a few different projects we had them do. A big one was after we read March, we asked them to create a short comic, like 2 to 3 pages, just like a modern hero. And so it really helped us work in research, but getting them to make that artwork just involved kind of finding creative ways around the kids who say they can't draw. So we brought in a comic book artist, a local comic book artist, to come give kids like a really quick tutorial about just drawing figures. I had kids tracing all over my room, like on the windows and on the smartboard, just tracing stuff. We had some kids that use Bitmojis and tell their story through Bitmojis. And so they got really creative with it. Some kids cut out like magazines. And I think kind of all of those whatever medium they chose, whether it was Bitmoji magazine or actually like freehand drawing or tracing, they still were able to kind of replicate what we were asking them to replicate, to use different perspectives and angles and think about colors and how each image connects to the next one. So, and eventually all the kids did start trying to draw something. But yeah, it was kind of fun to watch it unfold.
Okay, real quick, I want to acknowledge some more people that are checking in, but I've got another question that ties into from Sarah Donahue. Where can elementary school librarians go to match curriculum topics to comics that can support them? And that was going into my next, thank you, Sarah, because that's where I was going to go, is what are your recommendations? How do you start this partnership with your school librarian to help get more of these books into what you're trying to do? Go ahead, Kaitlyn, if you want to follow with that, because I think something tells me that experiment sent kids places that they hadn't been before in the school.
Yeah, I mean, so honestly, I should collaborate more with my librarian because she's awesome, and she's not one of these people who's resistant. Like, she loves that we're using these in our classrooms. But like, one of my favorite things is just when we finish March, is saying like, I hold up the second book, I'm like, who wants to read the next one? And they all like, the kids get all excited and they want to. I'm like, well, we're not in class, but there's like 8 copies in the library. Go, like, go get them. So like, that's just kind of sending them to the library to find more books so that they can work with our librarian. But she's also great in just like, if I say, hey, I'm looking for a title that will maybe our Hispanic kids will connect to for our book clubs, and she'll go and kind of research that for us.
John's got a very unusual school librarian at the high school where he works. John, you can talk a little bit about Kim and that collaboration that you guys have.
Yeah, Kim is great. I was just getting into comics myself, teaching comics. I've been taught comics in the classroom for a few years, and then she came to the high school and she revolutionized the library. It's very graphic novel heavy, manga heavy. She's really into that sort of thing. That's not all she does, but she, I don't have to go to her and ask for anything. She will come to my room with a handful of books and say, okay, John, you need to read these now. It's like, oh, okay. So one of them was My Friend Dahmer, which I've been teaching for years now. That was the first thing she said, you need to read this book.
Her collection in that library is better than a lot of public libraries. Yeah. She's really got an amazing, and just it's the input and the feedback from the students coming in there is really phenomenal. I want to go back to Sarah's question about where can you go to match topics. There's quite a few resources online, Sarah, that you can go to, but also recommend check in with your wholesaler, whether you're using Follett or Brodart or Mackin, and reach out to their collection development services department, because this has become a thing. And they've got specialists now who are on staff. Shannon, go ahead. I see you holding the pen up.
Yeah, you can also email me and I will send you curriculums and comics that you can put together. I'm happy to send you that. I have tons for elementary school people. That's what we do. We create the curriculum that matches with comics. So you can send me your grade and what you're looking for, and I can help you get a curriculum. And if I can order it, I can order it and send it to your school because I am a store. So I have the ability to do that.
Are you brave enough to pop your email into the all chat here?
Absolutely.
Go right ahead. And let's see. Wow, there's more people coming in from California. Thank you guys for joining us. There's one more that I wanted to. Oh, Liz from Philly. She's a school librarian at a K-8 bilingual charter school in the inner city of Philly. You know, Liz, you're not alone. I think every one of you guys are in multilingual communities now. That's become ubiquitous. Unless you're, I don't know where in this country anymore, you can't have a bilingual community. But what kind of resources, Kaitlyn, do you have? Do you feel that is something that you're finding your way into, bilingual comics?
It is definitely something that like culturally and linguistically diverse students are like a growing population in our school. So it's something I think I'm still working on and exploring. However, I've also found that like we use the Great Expectations manga classics, and I felt like I've really been able to get some of my ELL students involved in that kind of complicated story, whereas if I just gave them the actual text of Dickens, they probably wouldn't have been too involved in that. So I'm on the spectrum there. Like I'm still really finding some of those bilingual resources, but even the ones that are just in English are still helping out with those students a lot right now, I think.
All right, one of my favorite questions to ask is, since you guys have been at this for a little while now, some of the biggest surprises, things that you did not anticipate, and Shannon, I'll start with you, a response from either professionals, positive, or kids, or even parents that that surprised you, something that really made it worthwhile.
Yeah. I did anytime I've ever done a workshop, it's always kind of, I don't know where it's going to go, but I actually had a workshop where I was just testing out material, and it was all about just a history lesson, basically of how comics have tackled the issue of racism, and how they constantly are giving us something to talk about to stand against racism in our society. And nobody came to that workshop. It was at a con, and there was only one person that came, and she listened to the whole thing, and I was like, thanks for letting me just test it on you. I this is the first time I've done this one, so I'm glad you sat there and listened. And after I was done, she actually came up to me and said, I live in a small town. They don't let me have any books that will talk about racism or misogyny or anything at all. It has to be, I can have certain sections that promote their values, but I can't promote anything outside of that. And I don't know what to do. And this seems like a really good way to kind of ease into it, because they're not really going to pay attention to what my comic books are talking about. They're going to be paying attention. They're going to think, oh, you brought in some books for kids. That's great. And this is such a great way to do it. And she's like, I just need to know how to talk to the kids. And we ended up sitting there for 2 hours after the panel, just talking about how she could speak to her kids about the situations that were happening. And she said she had a lot of kids who would come up to her and said they wanted to come out, and they didn't know how because of their community, and they were super afraid. And so we figured out, I pointed her to some comic books that would help with that. Some that people might not have even think about, like, giving her Iceman coming out in X-Men comics, which is not a great way to show that it happened, but it did happen. And so they could go from there and have that conversation, and the school would just think she had X-Men comics. So it was definitely a positive experience that I kind of thought that we weren't going to have anybody engaged in it at all, since she was the only one, and to have her have this huge thing that would impact the lives of all of her students was such a good moment.
John, what about you? What would have been the surprise? Because you've been doing this for a few years now.
Yeah, it's more gratifying than anything else when I'll have seniors say, well, when are we going to start Watchmen? When are we going to do Watchmen? And it's well, we have to finish Hamlet first, so give it time.
And how often now it's become commonplace, but before then,
yeah, it wasn't.
You don't have kids asking you for books.
No. What's really nice is that sometimes a kid will just take one of my books, my graphic novels off the shelf, and just start reading it. And I can't really blame them for ignoring Hamlet, and they're just kind of reading. They're still reading something, so it's always a good book. So yeah, okay, you can do that. You take that day off from Hamlet and read something really good. I like Hamlet, don't get me wrong, but it goes a while.
Right.
So
all right, Kaitlyn.
Yeah, so I think I have two answers to that question. One is from the kids and just like how engaged they were. I remember I hosted a book club for the AP Lang kids, and we read my friend Dahmer, and we just had like a 30-minute discussion, and a kid literally left my room after the bell rang, and I just hear him like saying to his friend, the discussion was lit. And it was just like really cool to feel like the cool teacher. But I think like one of the biggest surprises for me was just honestly how supportive my administration has been of it. I remember when I was going to ask my principal for some money to buy some graphic novels, I had like really like psyched myself up for that conversation, like how I was going to defend it. And I was like, listen, I went to Comic-Con. I think that these books would be really good for our kids. I think to be really engaged. And I think I got like halfway through what I intended to say to him. And he was like, yeah, that sounds good. And was just like, sure, use your budget to get some of these books. So that was a big surprise. I did not expect that.
Hey, and you get kind of a follow-up here. Another anonymous attendee, do you recommend students create their story first and then come back and work on the graphics? This is as a way to get them more engaged in wanting to do the assignment versus doing it simultaneously. Is there an either or scenario here, or how do you approach that with your kids?
I think it could be either or. I've kind of actually done it both ways because I also teach creative writing. So it just kind of flowed naturally to write our short stories first and then teach comics and have them transfer it into a different medium. But with my 10th graders, we kind of do it backwards, where we read mentor text first, we read a graphic novel, or they've read a couple comics, and then they create their images. And really, it just kind of has then at the forefront, they're thinking more about like, okay, what kind of panels do I need to use? What kind of angles do I need to use? So I really think that could go either way.
John, do you have kids creating in your classroom?
I have them do a few things in preparation. I've tried to get people some of my artists into doing comics, and it's actually very difficult. It's like encourage them to it. A couple people have done really nice work. But what I do is I have them sort of create their own comics kind of in groups. I don't have them do like big projects, but I'll have them, when I'm teaching, the basics of comics, I'll have them do some comics, like a few panels to tell a story. But it's actually very difficult to get them to work on comics. That's not been my focus. I used to teach creative writing, and that was before I taught comics. I would have done what you do, Kaitlyn, if I was at that time in my life while I was teaching creative writing. But yeah, it's actually difficult to get a lot of them to do that, particularly the AP students. They don't feel comfortable doing that sort of stuff.
Is it because of the level of intricacy of something like Watchmen that it can be overwhelming? It seems because like, yeah, because when Kaitlyn was talking about the approaches the kids were taking with the graphics and some of their storytelling, I thought was really pretty. So maybe it's all depends on what their entry point is. Shannon, do you have a similar experience with that, or?
Yeah, when I do the writing workshops, I talk about the elements of the story and we kind of do it. We actually pick, there's like a 4 little starter point that they can pick of like their favorite character and their favorite sidekick and setting and stuff like that. And we kind of approach it from almost a fan fiction point of view, because at this point, a lot of comics are fan fiction because Batman's 80 years old. It's fan fiction at this point if you're writing Batman. But so we'll come at it from this angle, and it's kind of like, okay, we're going to go over these elements of the story, but do it the way that you feel comfortable. If you feel better starting out with the drawing and then going back and telling the story, guess what? Jack Kirby did that every day for forever. Like, that's totally fine. If you want to start with the story and then have a buddy even draw it for you later, write the story and have somebody else come in. And to make them feel comfortable, to your point of like, is it hard to compete with Dave Gibbons' art when you're looking at Watchmen? I usually draw for them. Like on the board, I'll say like, here's my panel of my first story. And then once they see that, they can only feel like they're doing a great job after they've seen me draw, because it's terrible. So I usually draw a duck, and I can't draw a duck to save my life. So it helps them feel really good about their art. But they do know that they're going in the elements of the story. So as long as they stay in the process of, if I can tell what your story is saying from panel to panel, it's totally cool for you to take it on drawing wise if that makes you feel more comfortable. But the whole point is to get them engaged. So whichever element it is that's going to engage them, that's where I want them to start.
There's a note from Elizabeth Diaz. She says she has, when she has kids do an assignment to preview, they preview, oh, thank you, books from Comics Plus. A lot of the kids, she says, chose Quince, probably because it's bilingual. It's about a Spanish character. Wonderful book, by the way. So do you have, each one of you, do you have kids now recommending books to you for what you're going to be teaching? John, have you had kids come in and say, can we do this one instead, or?
Actually, no, I haven't. I haven't had that. They will often, however, they'll often bring in manga or comics from the library, and I pay attention to what they're doing, and I might order that book. I've ordered that book occasionally when it's a really when a lot of people are reading it. So I actually pay attention to what they're bringing in from the library. So,
what about you, Kaitlyn, with your kids?
Yeah, pretty similar to John. Like I notice that, you know, what they're bringing in. What thing that I think has been really cool about bringing these into my classroom is it almost like opens up a doorway for kids to kind of form a relationship with me as like a teacher. Like they kind of realize like, oh, my teacher likes comic books and manga. And so they like to talk to me about what they're reading. It's not so much like a recommendation, like, can we do this? Or you should teach this. It's just kind of more like, I've read Death Note. Have you read Death Note? Like, you know, and like, they just want to talk to me about what they're reading, which I think is really cool.
If you had a wish list for publishers of subject areas you would love to see more stories of, this is one of those great opportunities where we like to share this information with our publishing friends, because you guys represent this new area of, for lack of a better term, market development for them. And oftentimes when a publisher, and I'm sure Shannon, because of where you work, a lot of those publishers don't realize all these additional benefits from what they're creating. But, you know, in your space, Shannon, what would you like to see more of?
Yeah, there's actually a couple of publishers who have started to label their single issues as dyslexia friendly, and they're using certain fonts and the way they're telling the story. It's actually really, really good, and I want more of that. I want to see more of the kid imprint starting to take on the idea of making something that's labeled dyslexia friendly or labeled this can help with this, because I think that that's really great for teachers. And
what defines that as dyslexia friendly? This is actually a first. I've not heard of this. This is really cool.
There is a font that specifically they are using, and it's a bit more spaced out, and the letters are shaped in a certain way so they don't have that, you know, wibbly wobbly transfer kind of thing. But on top of that, the story is, you see the action that they're doing, and the text is just, or the dialogue is just going to be exactly what's happening in that panel. So that's easier for them to put it together, but the way that it's a little bit different in the spacing. And that's actually what qualifies it as dyslexia friendly. And so I would love to see more of those in general. One of the good things is all of the publishers are starting to create kid and teen imprints. So I think that that's the next step, is taking it from just having kids comics that are individual issues and also graphic novels, but taking it to that step of specifically saying, you know, we're creating content that does help with that in some capacity.
John?
Nice.
What's on your wish list? What would you like to see more of?
Yeah, I would like to have much more in terms of like science writing and math writing. There's a thing I'm going to be changing a course. It's called Tech English right now, and I want to make it kind of a STEM course where it's like they're reading about math and science. And I would love more comics addressing those kinds of things, you know, math writing, science writing in comic book form, which would be really cool, I think. That's what I'd love to see more of.
Kaitlyn, how about you? What's on your wish list?
I don't even know it's so much as on my wish list. I feel like I mostly just have homework. Like like seeing some of these questions, I'm like, I need to go find some more bilingual comics. Like those really like have space in my classroom and I need to find those. And this year it's really just been about finding like representation, like looking for more comics that feature characters of color. So I think that's really just what I'm searching for right now. I think if in my dream world, my history and English classes would be merged and we would just have a humanities class and we'd be able to use
Yeah.
like graphic novels to teach both history and English at the same time. So yeah.
One of my from each one of you, I always find something that I get to learn from you guys in our email conversations, and we do these ramp ups. I was doing a workshop on about how the adaptation process works. And something John had pointed out to me in Romeo and Juliet, the manga classics adaptation, he says, in Shakespeare, he just says, and they fight. And there's this scene in the market square that's just total mayhem. And John's like, the level of destruction that happened because of this feud between the Montagues and the Capulets is so perfectly captured in this scene. But Shakespeare just gave stage direction, and this takes off and really does such a great job of showing that. How often do you guys find those books that really nail it for you? John, go ahead.
I wanted to add to because I direct Shakespeare plays, just for fun, I guess, at the high school. But I've directed Romeo and Juliet, and you have them fighting, but there's no way to show the level of destruction like the manga classics. Even doing it live, you can't do it the way they did it. Having directed Shakespeare, and it should be directed, it should be done live, but the manga classics really nails it. Hamlet too.
And if I could do a shameless plug, we actually have manga classics on the Comics Plus platform. Shannon, there's those images in your world that I think crystallize for you those teachable moments. Do you have anything that comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, as just in a comic book, like when I look at a comic book, we read one, and that's new. There's a book that's called Jonna and the Impossible Monsters, and it's brand new. It just came out, and I was in the middle of describing what the book was about during our Sunday night live stream. And usually the kids stuff we usually keep separate, but I was like, this book is so like dual, everybody's gonna love it. And I'm talking about it, and my husband's showing the art, and he said the first half of this book is just a picture book, and then the middle kind of has 1 or 2 words per page, and then the back half is a full story. And he's kind of showing that, and as he's saying that, a light bulb goes off in my head, and I was like, wait, this is a bridge book, give me this book back. Like nobody, like I need this book, I have to build an entire, I was like, I have to go right now, I need to build a curriculum around this idea of going from a picture book to full on reading materials, because this book shows it so perfectly. And by the time you're invested in the story, you didn't even realize that you'd started reading. And so it's those moments like that, and it comes from anything. Like you're flipping through a book and suddenly this thing just triggers in your brain and you have to act on it immediately. And reading so many different books all the time, there's so many different levels of those kinds of experiences that I have, and I never know what I'm going to find from one week to the next when I'm reading these, which is why I have a Google form to remind me what it was I read.
Right. Hey, Kaitlyn, when you are selecting for the next semester, what is your process like? Is there collaboration with the librarian at that point, or is this a submission process through admin? How do you deal with that?
I'm kind of lucky in that we have a lot of autonomy. So mostly it's just like I talk with my 10th grade team, which is where we mostly use these comics and graphic novels. And we just start kind of exploring what kind of titles might fit with what we're teaching. And then from there, it would be, there's a lot of Google searching and like browsing Twitter involved in that. But from there, then it would be going to the librarian and saying like, do we have copies of these? Are we able to borrow copies of these from either a public library or another school. And then if we don't, then it's kind of going to administration and begging for money.
Right. John, what about you?
We don't actually have to beg for money. We just order in November, December, and I hadn't read, and I wish I had read Becker's Kent State by that point, because I would have ordered a class set of those. But you have to, oftentimes I'll find stuff and I'll have to wait till the next year to order it. And then it's a year after that I'll get it. But we just have to ask for them. But now there's a new thing. Administration has gotten gun shy about objections to works. And so we have to fill out a justification form. I'm pretty good at doing those. It's like, yeah, here's, yada, yada. And this is why it's important. Here are the standards we're going to be addressing through this and all that kind of stuff. It's not that big a deal. I've never really been denied anything. It's just another extra step, but they'll just, if I order it, they'll get it. But it usually takes like, it takes it's not till the next year that I'll get that in.
And I think that's also important for any of the publishers that we talk with, because especially in the comics world, these guys are just now getting a sense that there's this moment, but they don't understand how much of a long tail there is in development for this part of the market for their books. All right, I've got a surprise question for all three of you, because I know you've had this experience. Presenting at a Comic-Con, how did that come about? What did you think of the experience? We got 8 minutes left, so I figured we could have some fun with this one. I'm going to start with Kaitlyn. Well, actually, I'm kind of responsible for the torture of two people on this panel. But Kaitlyn, you can go first.
Yeah, so I think the first Comic-Con I went to, just as an attendee, I went with a friend and we were like, man, this is fascinating. Like, I just loved hearing other professionals talk about these books that they were using and all of the different topics they were able to address through these books. And I think one thing we really felt like we were lacking is we wanted to walk away with like, here are the materials that you can use in your classroom. Like, here's a list of books that you should go look at right now. And so that's what really got me inspired to want to present at a Comic-Con, because I wanted to share my stuff, to like show what I was doing. And then once I did it, I was just so excited by the questions we were getting from people, and how many other people just were in the room and were excited about it. And then going to San Diego and presenting there was just like, I feel like my memories are like foggy, because it was just like such an incredible experience to stand next to Jinlun Yang and be like, hello, sir. I'm standing beside you right now. It was awesome. But it was motivating to see how many educators are excited about, and that growing community that's just excited about using these books in their classroom.
Hey, John, you presented in New York, and the process for that is much different than, say, like NCTE or IRA or any of those other shows. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, part of it is you got me into it, but it actually started when I taught Watchmen. I think you got me in touch with the guy who was editing Graphic Novel Reporter.
Oh yeah, John Hogan.
An article. Yeah, John Hogan. He wanted me to. He sent me interview questions and I was going to answer them, but I just like wrote an essay, and it went over well. And then I started doing stuff with Diamond, because you were working with Diamond at that time, and I was working with Diamond that would sponsor these things, and that's where I started with Diamond sponsored talks. And I talked with another teacher or whatever, and how we were teaching. And
but is it different? It's not like when you submit for NCTE or one of the educational conferences.
No,
it's all different language that you use.
It really is. You don't use the academic language, that kind of stuff. You when you're in with a bunch of teachers, you can do that a little bit, but still, it's a lot of the people when you're teaching at a it's sort of comics 101 sort of stuff. Like, there's a lot of people who are not who just have questions about how to do comics, or they're the first time attendees often. So So that's the sort of stuff that I see. And it's a different group than you get at NCTE.
Right. Shannon, you've done more than a couple, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so you're in the Austin area.
Yes.
Yes. So you've got a couple different cons that pop up there. What kind of audience do you get? Is it similar to what John and Kaitlyn were describing? It's the 101 crowd that are looking for help?
I've had a little bit of everything when it comes to comic conventions. I've done workshops that are specifically for kids at Comic-Cons, and a lot of times it's kids and their parents at that point. I've done some that are for adults, that are for educators, and so it is a very interesting thing. I actually find, for me, it's the opposite, because I wrote my workshops originally, for a lot of them, for the Comic-Con crowd. So I go in to schools and have to take out a lot of my pop culture references that I realize, if you haven't read, the entire Gail Simone index of comics, you might not get why I made that joke that I made in the middle of that workshop. And so I find that I actually have to do it the opposite direction. And that is a big point, is if you are, kind of like John said, if you are going to talk at a Comic-Con, you also need to assume that the people in the room are there because they want to talk about the comic books. And you have to kind of know a lot about what's going on in the comic book world. And it's not just, oh, let me reference back to this one comic or to, this particular thing. A lot of times you have to be able to say, this is exactly it. This, here are a lot of comics, like Kaitlyn said, here's a list of comics you can use, and kind of know about those, because they're going to ask questions about a specific book a lot of times. And so you might need to know about it, or be willing to ask some questions to them about what that book's about. Because when you're speaking at the Comic-Con, you are definitely talking to the people who already are on the comic side. So now you're giving them the other half of the information.
And you got to make sure you have handouts.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
For sure.
And cards.
If you don't know how to run your own tech, be prepared to bring somebody who does, because a lot of times you'll walk into your panel room and there's nobody there to set up your equipment, and you have to know how to do that on whatever system they have. So.
There is, yes, definitely. Okay, real quick, we got one last question here. Massachusetts library student, high school teacher, parent of a first and third grader, interested in learning more about how and if elementary students can get started with graphic novels. And any good titles to recommend for lower elementary grades? Okay, Gina, I'm going to go ahead and throw out the big old Comics Plus hook. There are so many more great books that are coming out for younger readers. Thank you, Dogman. And before then, thank you, Captain Underpants, because the floodgates are open. By the way, if you didn't know this already, Dogman is outselling Harry Potter by a lot. That's where we are, and the kids are demanding it. Okay, so the recording of this session is going to be available next week at librarypass.com. You can dive into that through upcoming events. Thank you for you guys for doing this for me tonight. Shannon, John, Kaitlyn, it's always wonderful to see you guys.